How to Write a Literature Review, a guide by Professor Cretney for Kelsey Fullerton Sociology 308 students. So what is a literature review? A literature review surveys, summarizes, and links together previous research in a given field. The point is to establish what came before and fit the research to the scope of your topic. You survey by looking through a lot of research before you pick the specific sources for your paper. You summarize by simply stating only the information from the source that helps support your narrow approach. So this means explaining what the research found, not telling me the backstory of the authors or the full methodology, or putting in a bunch of extra info. Summarizing does not mean summarize the entire book or entire article. It means summarizing their arguments as it relates to your paper. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. We'll go through the sample. And lastly, the literature review links together previous research in a given field. It's not enough to list articles. Paragraph 1, Article 1. Paragraph 2, Article 2. You should organize by topic. Like in your first paper assignment, the outline. You find the articles to connect to those topics. And you'll find articles that share arguments or maybe contrast arguments or theory. That's how they should be organized in the paper. So this means some paragraphs may only have one source, while others may have 3 or 4. It's about your arguments and using the research to back up and validate your arguments. So the old format, that high school paper format or early college format of intro, body, conclusion, can be hard to shake for people. Roots of that are still in your research paper, but instead of just regurgitating 3 things, you analyze, you contextualize, you fit the research to the scope of your paper. You lead it with your voice. So we're going to go over some examples of that in a bit. So the literature review is an essential part of a research paper. For the purposes of this class, it's the most important part. It's the most important because it sets up the scope of your planned research. It can either make or break your paper because it can either demonstrate mastery and knowledge, or it can be a muddled summary that seems like a cut and paste of other people's arguments. It can be hard to transition to the research paper format, which is why I ask you to use the resources in this class, such as the audio lectures, like this one, the additional resources, the assignment sheets, the grading rubrics. I'm also a resource to you, so feel free to reach out. Also, there's the Writing Center at school, the department, which also provides the Sociology writing tutor. These are resources that can help you with your paper. So please use these resources. They're going to help you so much in this class. The literature review sets up the scope and theoretical foundations. So it's important to lead with your voice and keep focused on your research question, leading your analysis. So that's what a literature review is. A literature review is not an annotated bibliography. That's just a list of resources. Within a lit review, you need to use that citation sandwich where you lead with your voice, use the research to back it up, then connect back to your paper. For example, a lead-in your voice. So if I'm writing about media portrayals of women, I could lead with my voice, cite something, then connect. So I can say, images that sexualize women in the media have real-world consequences. According to Jean Kilbourne, many young women develop self-esteem issues, eating disorders, and self-harming behaviors to better fit societal beauty ideals. We need better and more diverse representations of women to reduce this social harm. So I led in with my voice. My argument was about sexualizing women, that has consequences. Then I used specific research to support that claim. Then I ended by tying it back to the topic, in this case, representations of women. Okay, moving on. A literature review is not a list of unrelated sources. It can sound like that when you don't organize your citations around the topic, but instead just pop them in, paragraph 1, article 1, paragraph 2, article 2. Often without transitions in between, which sounds like you can read a thing and pop it in your paper, but I'm left wondering as the reader, what is your argument? How are these articles or their arguments related to one another or at all? It makes it seem as if you don't have a grasp on the topic, which destroys the credibility of the section that you need. It's also not background information for concepts. So you will explain any specific concepts you bring into the paper, but you don't need to give the entire background. For example, maybe use conflict theory to help your analysis of income inequality in the United States. You would be clear about what you mean and how you define the theory or its arguments, but you're not going to start talking about Marx and his childhood or the context under which he wrote Das Kapital or anything like that. Remember, it's often best to be concise. So focus your paper on what's important, right? What do we need to know about that theory or article or book? Don't give the reader all the info in the world to try to sort through, to try to understand what you're saying. A literature review is not an argument for the importance of your research, though it will support your position. So the purpose of the review is to show you understand what came before, that your research makes sense within that context. You're subtly making the argument for your thesis in this section, but through using this great citation sandwich information, not by saying, see this means I'm right, because you're still supposed to do the research to find the results. You predict what you think will happen with your hypothesis, which is worded to show that it could be the case, not that it is the case. I already know this, right? You don't want that vibe, right? You're still trying to find out whether or not that's the case. Okay, so now we've gone through what they are, what they're not, right? This can be helpful because often you hear the word literature review a lot, but few people will take the time to really break it down and tell you what's expected. I certainly never had anyone define it for me when I was an undergrad. It was kind of expected I would just know it already, or if I didn't, that I would adapt, but I think that's unfair. I want to be as clear as possible about my expectations in this course so you know what to do, and so you don't feel lost like I often did in undergrad. Literature reviews are important. They demonstrate knowledge. As when the section is led by your voice, it's as if you're holding the hand of the reader and leading them through the information, like a tour guide, pointing out to all the things that you're supposed to notice, instead of telling them every single detail about everything. It shows that you know what you're talking about. In the case of doing research, this is essential in the literature review section, as it was in the proposal, because you need to argue that this research should be conducted. It's hard to do that when you haven't explained what the issue is, or how or why you want to examine it. The literature review is important to fit your research into that which came before it. Everything we know comes from somewhere. In research, we're standing on the shoulders of academics, theorists, and activists that came before us, which is why it's important to accurately communicate their arguments. This is where you do a little reflection to make sure your approach makes sense. That comes from reading more and more research on a topic that will make clear to you the patterns or trends related to that topic. Okay, so briefly we're going to go through the steps for writing a literature review, and then we're going to go through each one individually. So planning, you've done this already. This consists of developing a research question, making an outline, and a few drafts. Reading and research is the background to creating your lit review, where you read through other people's research and scrutinize it to see if it would work in your paper or if it connects to other research you have included in the paper. Analyzing is the part which makes it different from the 3-part essay format. Analyzing is bringing in your voice. In high school and lower division college, it's more about can you show 3 points. But for this, it's can you analyze the meanings of the results? Can you analyze the connection and the findings of your topic or ways in which it connects to, again, other research? You're creating the research. You become a producer of knowledge in a research paper instead of a more passive consumer of knowledge. Okay, so the 2 things that make papers great are drafting and revising. Drafting is a situation where it's the more the merrier, right? When it comes to drafts. The best strategy I found in my busy life is to give myself a chunk of time to work on the draft, then I put it aside to do other things. It sounds like it takes more time that way, but I've found that I spend much less time writing if I spend like 30 minutes to an hour a week on some project. Then I can stop myself when that time's up, and I have more time to reflect and work on it in my brain while I'm doing other stuff, like working many jobs, dishes, laundry, whatever. Somewhere a tiny bit of the brain is thinking about my research paper. So when I come back to it to do another hour for the next week, I see it with fresh eyes, which is something you can't do when you sit down for a 6-hour period to crank the whole thing out the day it's due. And I get why students do that. I did it as a student. It took me so long to learn that it's much more chill to do it over time. Little chunks here and there. It helps you avoid stress, procrastination, writer's block, and crappy last-minute papers. And again, revising is the other part that makes for great papers. It should work in tandem with drafts. So you draft it, then you revise it. So let it sit a little bit, revise it, right? So look through carefully for word choices. Take a pass through to see if you're overusing words or transitional phrases. It's a specific task of the brain to revise, which is very different from the more creative drafting part. This is why you should do them separately instead of trying to write the perfect sentence top to bottom, as many people do. They think they're saving time not having more drafts, but in reality it takes way longer to write their paper, and it's literally painful as a process to your brain and really to your emotions. So revise and draft until you get the paper you deserve. So now that I've said all that, we're still going to go into them individually a little bit. Planning. I know you've done this part already, but it's important to quickly review. Your paper needs a focus, which comes from you. The best way to do this is to sort and categorize information you find for the paper into subtopics or subheadings in the section which provide clarity and organization. You also want to eliminate irrelevant information, like what college did the research come from, the long-ass title of the research study, all the details they did. Oh, the research was in 2005 to 2009 and had 2,700 participants using this specific framework, right? That's never going to be discussed again or relevant to your paper. Just focus on the important stuff. And really, what is the specific research question that my literature review helps to define? We will have a peer review assignment where you look through another student's paper. They should be able to easily locate your research question at or near the end of your introduction section of the paper. It's important to state it as a question and not as something you already assume to be the case. In sociology, we battle a lot of quote-unquote common sense things that have everything to do with culture and not sense. So we only confront and unpack these things by being open and inquisitive to what we may find. Okay, so when it comes to reading and researching, you got to summarize sources. So this is part, but not all, of preparing information for your literature review. You should always keep in mind the following questions. What's the principal argument, conclusion, or thesis of the research that you're looking at? What is the research arguing or demonstrating? I also want to quickly add a bit about direct citations. Some students will cite a study that's citing another study. That's frowned upon for a few reasons. One, it's lazy. Two, it's borderline plagiaristic. It's plagiarism light. And really, C, it's like academic hearsay. You say researcher A says, researcher B says blank. If the information is useful, go to their reference page, find the article that they're referring to, and use that as a direct source instead of indirectly citing it. So remember, you want to focus on what an article is arguing or demonstrating, not what they said other people said in their lit review. So other questions to keep in mind: how does this study relate to other studies of the topic? This will help you better organize this section. And most importantly, what does all this study add to your project? This is the one to remember if you forget everything else, right? Because this will best frame what to include and what to exclude based on how you're approaching the topic. When it comes to analyzing sources, a literature review is never just a list of studies. It needs your voice to lead it, to explain it, to contextualize it to the, reader. So while you use previous research to structure the lit review, your voice has to drive the section, right? So what the hell does that even mean? Well, again, this means that you make an argument, you use the research to back it up, then you fit it to the scope of your topic. Can you give me an example? Of course. Right? Let's turn to one of the sample papers on Canvas. Let me show you that real quick and we'll go through it a little bit. Okay, so this is the sample lit number 1, part of your world, deconstructing presentations of femininity within animated Disney classics. Okay, so let's go into the lit review section down here. Okay, let's start with theoretical framework. Not every research paper is going to have a theoretical framework, but this one does. So let's start there. Okay, so this research primarily relies on the basic tenets of cultivation theory as developed by George Gerbner and Larry Gross. So that is telling me cultivation theory has different interpretations, and the one that's being used for the paper is this particular one, right? Then the research is used to back up the arguments, right? Cultivation theory is concerned with the relationship between individuals, television programs, and the social world. Basically, they're saying people who spend extended periods of time watching TV are likely to behave in ways which affirm the values or norms that they see on TV, right? So what the hell does that have to do with your paper? Well, here's how she explains it, right? Because many parents see Walt Disney Company as a source of wholesome quality entertainment, They allow and encourage their children to immerse themselves in the Disney universe. Right? And then she continues talking about how nowadays you can like stream it on a tablet. So it's even more convenient than like my childhood where you had like 3 VHS tapes. that was it. Right? So, she talks about the repetition, right? And that, it familiarizes them with with the Disney world, right? And then she connects that back to research. So again, if you come back up here, you see that this is her voice leading, right? She talks about the research specifically, and here she's citing multiple studies that each one she'll get into more in depth in a bit, right? That's a really good strategy for when you're making a more summarizing argument. And then she connects it back to, how does this fit the scope of her paper, right? Why does this matter to her paper, right? So this is the kind of citation sandwich I'm talking about. You lead in with your voice, you use the research to back it up, then you contextualize how it fits. All right, so that's one example, but that's a theoretical framework. Not everyone has one of those. Let's find another example. Let's see, to give you an idea of how this works. Okay, here we go. Here's one. More often than not, it is young girls who hold themselves accountable to the standards of beauty set by Disney films. That's the author's argument. Right? That's the voice of the researcher leading the research, right? That's not what the research is saying. That's what the author's saying, right? Then this student, well, I've already said she, so whatever, she uses, I was like trying to keep it neutral, but I didn't. So then she uses the research to back up her point, right? So young girls hold themselves accountable to standards of beauty set by Disney films. So then she talks about, well, what are those? Right? What does the research say those are? That they have pale skin tone, small waist, delicate limbs, full breasts, and lusciously thick hair, right? And then, okay, cool. So what the hell does that have to do with her research study? Well, she connects this back, right? She talks about such characteristics can be particularly problematic as the princesses generally do not represent the traits possessed by ordinary women. Indeed, the image of traditional princess necessarily alienates a large proportion of young girls, as arbitrary factors like race, ethnicity, and overall physical build act to exclude them from the exclusive princess club. Right? So basically, again, she's using her voice to lead it here, right? She's using the research to back that up. And then again, she's using her voice here to talk about why that connects to her topic. Right? And then again, she later cycles back to research. That's a whole nother thing. But anyway, that's kind of the example of the citation sandwich I'm giving you. And this is why I provide you with sample papers. It's not so you can duplicate them or do the exact same thing. It's just to give you an idea of how it's been done before. I don't expect your paper to look like this. If anything, it's a bit wordy, right? I mean, it's a great paper, but the final paper was better than this lit review one is because she had more time to edit in between and take out some of the wordiness and make it more direct, right? So we'll talk about that final paper later on. But anyway, I just wanted to give you an example, and this is why the samples are here, so you can kind of go through it, and if you keep your eye looking for those citation sandwiches, you can see the parts that are led by the voice. You can see how there's the research in between in the middle, right? The avocado in the middle. And then you see how her argument is connecting it back because her topic is about, gender roles and portrayals within Disney films and how that affects children and their perceptions, right? So that's how she keeps the focus on her argument throughout. And that's what I'm looking for in your papers. Okay, moving back to here. So that citation sandwich, remember, that's the bread on both ends, your voice. The meat in the middle is the research and what it's demonstrated, or for veggies like me, it's the avocado in the middle, right? Whatever you like to put in your sandwich. So, again, that's why I wanted to show you some of the specifics of the sample to give you an idea of why it works. Okay, some tips and strategies while writing. So document and cite sources as you take the information from them. This is a great tip so you never lose track of helpful info for your paper. For the last paper, the research proposal, you only needed 5 sources, which is much easier to organize than the 10 sources required by paper number 3, literature review. So the more you have, the more complicated it can be to keep them all straight. So I like to cite them right away too, because that saves me time at the end. Okay, so bookmark your sources so you can easily access them later. I went over how to do this with sources from the Cal State Fullerton Public Library in a previous week's additional content to help you best navigate this resource. The last thing you want is to find that perfect information and then misplace it. Also, I'm older than you, so the way I like to go is often to mark up hard copies, for information that's relevant for my paper. I still read a lot on computers, but if it's like a super long article that fits my scope, sometimes I want to print it out so I can highlight things and write crap in the margins and really pore over it, right? Or have it as a physical source when comparing it to multiple other articles. Also, you want to keep track of page numbers for direct quotes. You need to include page numbers in the in-text parenthetical citations in ASA format for any direct quotes. So as a reminder, I know I've already said this a million times, but please limit your quotations. I've talked about this there was like even a full previous lecture that went into this, right? Unless you fit the criteria for using quotes, it's almost always best to paraphrase instead. It not only saves you the time of looking up the page numbers, but it also means the wording and the flow will better fit the paper because it's consistent with your voice. Also, you want to note connections between sources while you're writing. Again, this saves you so much time after the fact, and it will aid you in the organization of the section. So I've mentioned before that the Google Doc is the most often my strategy, where I make a Google Doc for my research, cut and paste the chunk of the research that fits what I need, or maybe an abstract. Then I write a one-word label for where it fits in my paper. So let's say my subheadings were race, class, and gender, so I label it class, knowing that's where it's going to fit. Last, I write a 1 or 2 sentence description of how it connects to my topic, and then I do the citation information, the in-text and post-text citation info in ASA is set on to do it later. So you're not me. You don't have to take this approach. I just want to expose you to as many approaches as possible, because sometimes you have to try different things to find the one that's best for you. You do not have to do it like I do. It's not about making sycophants in this class. It's about helping you find the strategies that work best for you. When it comes to summary and synthesis, I want to give you just a couple examples of format just to mix things up in your wording. Like, you don't necessarily want the same repetitive wording throughout. So here's a couple examples to help you, right? Kind of differentiate that a little bit. Whether it's an active voice, like the first example here, or in passive voice, like the second one. If you're having trouble introducing the research in the middle of that citation sandwich, some of this wording could be helpful, right? So for example, Chomsky demonstrated. This is focused to the findings of the research and will help you cut out all the unnecessary BS when you take that approach. The next one, early work by McChesney and Nichols was concerned with. So these are just other ways of saying, according to so-and-so, which is also fine and proper. It's just a matter of mixing it up a little for the sake of the flow and the readability of your paper. All right, the next one. Additional work by Karasawa et al., 2009, deals with. So again, this can help you in connecting research on the same topic, or the next one that deals with comparing as well. These results reflect consequences of discrimination, similar to those reported by Peterson and Banderas, 2020. Right? So again, helping you connect the different research articles in your paper, which again, helps better organize and really create stronger arguments. This last one here, culture of poverty theory has received its share of criticism. So that's actually part of your voice. One of the most frequently cited shortcomings of the approach centers around, so in this case, it's the voice lead-in that talks about the criticism to set up what the research is saying. So again, I hope these are helpful. These are by no means the only appropriate ways to do it. I just wanted to give you some ideas of different ways to approach it other than just according to so-and-so, research found so-and-so, right? Just to kind of mix it up a little bit. Okay, so some important literature review information. Make sure everyone knows by the end of this lecture. Okay, so you want to have an introduction or a little you want to introduce the literature review. The section should have a mini intro paragraph where you say something like, In this section, I will explore the factors of A, B, and C in relation, I don't know why I'm saying that like that, in relation to the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on children's education, or whatever your topic may be, right? This helps tell the reader where you're going. It adds a helpful guidepost up top of your literature review, right? Also, this is kind of the biggest one, organized by topic or argument, not by article. So this is the thing I'm going to just be like, oh, really tearing up in your papers if it's like paragraph 1, article 1, paragraph 2, article 2 every single time, and they aren't connected in any sort of way. That's not really analysis, right? It's just summary. So you want, the most important thing about your lit review, really, to learn about lit reviews is to organize by topic or subtopic, right? Subheading, argument. This is that analysis when you explore the connections between the research in your topic or the research and other research in the section. So subheadings for organization is a great way to go. I highly suggest this if you have a few different topics you explore in the paper. So let's say I'm writing about the second shift, right? I'm sure you've all heard of the concept, the second shift. So if I'm writing about the second shift, I could organize my literature review into subheadings such as gender role expectations of mothers, racial and class exclusion of the ideal stay-home-at-mom archetype, and let's say challenges or changes that have happened in the economy that led to dual worker families, right? Those could be 3 different things I explore within the paper about the second shift. So you want subheadings that are more or less mutually exclusive, as that's going to help you best organize the section. Also, you summarize ideas, conflicts, and themes. That's obvi. All right, you need to conclude the section. So just like you have a mini intro, you need a mini conclusion to restate what you've explored. And you'll also need to add the hypothesis to the end of your literature review in that section, in your little mini conclusion, so that it connects to the methods in how you're going to be conducting the research, to answer that research question and to test your hypothesis. So you want to point out gaps in the research and the need for future research in the paper's conclusion section, not in the literature review. You can somewhat touch upon it in the lit review if that's relevant for your paper, but for the paper in this class, I ask you specifically address this in the paper's conclusion section after you wrap up the main points of the paper. In this case, that your topic should be studied sociologically, or it's a social issue in need of attention. Remember, every paper submission in this class builds on the last one. So you turned in your outline first, then your outline became your proposal. Then you turned in your proposal, and now your proposal becomes your literature review. So the specifics are on the assignment sheet on Canvas, along with the grading rubric for the assignment, so you can best prepare for the most possible points. Even though it's called literature review, I expect all sections of the paper, specifically the introduction, literature review, methods, and conclusion sections. So I hope this little extra lecture is helpful to you. Remember, use the resources from this class. Use your books, the previous lectures, and additional content, as well as the sample papers, assignment sheets, grading rubrics. These are all resources to help you complete this submission. There's also the tutors, right, that I discussed before, whether it's the University Learning Center tutors, the Writing Center, the Sociology writing tutor, right? Or just bug a classmate, a loved one, or a friend to read through it for you, because they're going to see things that your brain explains away as your brain's working through the paper. Having someone really look at it can be so helpful, which is why we're going to do a peer review with the literature reviews that you submit, so that you'll have feedback on your paper from me like you did for your proposal, but you're also going to have it from a classmate.